I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. In this week's episode, we are covering all things related to quarantine wellness and lessons for what we can take with us well beyond this time of quarantining. As we settle into our new normal, which many of us are doing, whether it's something that we're excited about or we're kind of begrudgingly, we are finding that new normal. And it is essential that we prioritize well-being in all things that we're doing. And I encourage you to really use this, what's really a bizarre time of quarantine. For many of us, it means staying really close to home. I encourage you to use this time for a deep dose of self-discovery. We're learning a lot about ourselves during this time. We're learning how we handle stress, how we react to it. What do we turn to as our release from stress? And these are things that we're experiencing in a much more compressed, compact way than we usually do. It's a lot more probably right in our space. It's not so spread out over weeks or months, but it's very condensed. And so we can take these lessons and see, okay, how are we reacting to things? Where are my positives? What am I strong in? And what do I really need to improve upon? And taking these lessons and what we're learning well beyond this time. And when we're talking about wellness during coronavirus quarantine, we use the word wellness a lot. It is in the title of this podcast, Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. And wellness means a lot of different things for different people. I typically look at it as 5 key elements, thinking of these as kind of the 5 key pillars of wellness. And each of these 5 components plays a key role in protecting our mental wellness, our physical wellness, and also our immune system. So those 5, which we'll be touching on, are nutrition, of course, alcohol and our relationship with that, movement, sleep, and of course, our mental well-being. So when we're talking about nutrition, which is what we'll cover a lot in this podcast episode, is wellness nutrition, especially as it relates to quarantining and then this period beyond quarantining, but why nutrition matters more than ever, especially as we're dealing with stress, as we're dealing with uncertainty. We'll be talking about strategies for managing cravings. That's a huge thing that I know a lot of us are struggling with. And mindless eating. Again, this is getting the best of a lot of us. And we'll be talking about options for meals and dishes that are meatless. And whether you're looking to specifically seek out a plant-based diet, you've been tossing around the idea of incorporating more vegan dishes, more vegetarian dishes. But if you've read about it, a lot of us have been seeing that there's the issue with potential meat shortages, and whether this becomes a true reality or not, it still causes us worry that it might happen. And there's so many easy ways that we can create these rich, satisfying dishes without meat. So we'll be talking about that as well. Plus, it kind of has a double benefit that we can use that to automatically boost our intake of nutrient-rich vegetables and fruits, essentially effortlessly, and creating these splurge-worthy indulgences. And then finally, we'll be looking at a dozen plus ways to incorporate immune-boosting probiotics. So those are all the things that we'll be covering about nutrition today. What I would encourage you, though, is as you're thinking about wellness and well-being during this period of quarantine, whether it's a few more weeks or whether it's longer or however we end up kind of gradually phasing back into our usual normal, thinking about wellness as not just nutrition, but nutrition, alcohol, as I mentioned. And so a lot of people have given up alcohol already for Lent, and they've kind of continued that into this coronavirus quarantine. If so, keep rolling with that. If not, I would encourage you to take a really close look at how your relationship with alcohol has changed possibly during or how you've been turning to it or not turning to it during this time of quarantine. So a lot of people have found that they really haven't wanted to drink. They've been more at home, more by themselves. They're not doing so much socially, and alcohol is not really a factor. But if you have been at home and you are still kind of on that lockdown mode, yet you are drinking even more, I would really encourage you to look at that as why. And are we turning to alcohol as that release from the things that are kind of swirling around us, and then to dial back that noise, to turn down that noise in our brains? And how healthy is that relationship with alcohol? And we've done a lot of podcasts. You can scroll through the library. We have a really fantastic one on the science of alcohol on our brains, bodies, and spirits. And I would encourage you to listen to that. It's we've got a alcohol science researcher, and we have two addiction specialists who are really talking a lot about the why things happen. And so that's one that we totally have you covered on that, with information about the Alcohol Free for 40 challenge, which is one entire podcast. Also, actually 2 podcasts, and then the science of alcohol in our brains, bodies, spirits. So number 1, nutrition. Number 2, alcohol. And number 3, movement. Even if you can't get to your gym, which, we haven't been able to, but you can create it in your living room, your bedroom, your backyard, the street, outside, finding a way that we're getting some sort of release. And for a lot of people who have been turning to alcohol more than what you would like to, that physical movement can be that outlet for us instead. So movement number 3, sleep number 4. We've done an entire podcast on sleep as well, but aiming for at least 7 hours a night for optimal immune function. And skimping on sleep also makes it easier to keep things together when it comes to cravings, when it comes to alcohol, when it comes to getting our workouts in. So that's going to be a key element of our well-being. And then number 5, of course, is our mental well-being, staying positive. And we've talked a lot in the past weeks about making space for positivity and specific strategies to help manage stress. And I've said before, it's a very easy statement to say, oh, we need to find ways to manage our stress. But we've also done podcasts and recent episodes, as you scroll back from the library from this one, that really dive into specific strategies, specific tools. We have a mental performance coach who joins me. So lots that we've covered on that. So when we're looking at those 5 key elements of well-being, we're going to look at nutrition, food, what we drink, but also number 2, our relationship with alcohol. Number 3, our movement. Number 4, sleep. And number 5, that mental well-being and staying positive. So this is going to be kind of our overarching, and I would encourage you to think, where's kind of been your weak spot in this? But the rest of this podcast episode is going to focus mostly on nutrition. One thing I would say is, as we're talking about maintaining that mental well-being and staying positive, making sure that we are maintaining these personal connections that matter the most to us. And now more than ever, we have to remember to think outside of ourselves. It's easy to get real caught up in what we're doing, kind of in this little micro world that we have now. But this is so much bigger than us. And just because we're okay doesn't mean that our neighbor, our families, our friends, our coworker, our parents might be. So remembering to check in on everyone who really matters to you. Ask them, how are they doing physically? How are they doing emotionally? And when they start to answer you, listen, don't talk, just really listen, be patient, be open to them, be loving, be forgiving. And I would encourage that, not with just everybody that you're reaching out to, these people who really matter in your lives, but with ourselves, be patient, be loving, be forgiving. And that, I would say, applies to food and nutrition as well. I've had a lot of people tell me that they are just like really discouraged. They've been bummed at their behavior, that they feel like they are just rummaging through the fridge all day, or they're more lethargic than they'd hoped they would be. And they're really being hard on themselves, and they've been through a hard time. They haven't gone through this before. It's a lot new that they're experiencing. So when we're talking about being patient, being loving, being forgiving, everything that we're going to be talking about moving forward with nutrition and wellness, if you haven't been doing it, it's okay. Give yourself that pass, and give yourself that element of understanding, just like you would any of your friends. But as we said earlier, looking at this as an opportunity to learn, to grow, and taking this experience that we're having during coronavirus quarantine and looking at it almost as a science experiment with ourselves, because we are experiencing everything in this very compressed, compact way. Everything's much more intense of what we're experiencing all in one space, very close together than what we typically do. So as we're talking about nutrition and we're talking about, okay, what are some strategies we can do to kind of get a hold of things during the coronavirus quarantine, but also as we are kind of phasing back into our new lives and why it matters now. So always nutrition is important, but especially now, thinking of what we're putting into our bodies, thinking of it as how we're fueling our bodies. It's less about I'm craving a cookie or I have brownies here, but looking at how are you fueling your body to maximize your energy, to support your immune system, to handle these levels of stress. So truly looking at food as how are you fueling your body for these things, your immune system, your energy, your stress levels. And I think when we center it on that, it's easier to think of it more in terms of nourishing our bodies well versus I shouldn't have that cookie or I shouldn't have those chips. And so thinking of it as that big picture, I think first. Then when we look at, okay, what is the weak link for almost everybody? It all comes down to almost always sugar and processed carbs. And there's so many reasons we want to edge these out of our diet. For one, when we are feeling low, lethargic, depressed, we instinctively reach for these foods, the sugars, the processed carbs, because number one, they give us that quick lift of energy. They create that serotonin release. They have that kind of surge of feel good, relaxation, hormones and chemicals that are released throughout our bodies. But these things are also pro-inflammatory. They cause this rapid release of energy, this rapid surge followed by this crash. So as much as possible, while those might be the things we're craving most, they're the things that are worst for our bodies, our minds, our spirits, especially now. So I would look for ways to say, how can I dial these out of my diet? Now, that means we have to find nutritious alternatives to these. And so if you say, I'm really craving chocolate or I really want a chocolate chip cookie and someone tells you go eat an apple, it's not the same thing. And no matter how much we try to tell ourselves, grapes are just as sweet as, whatever type of other indulgence we're craving, it's just not the same thing. So trying to find nutritious alternatives that are truly a viable alternative to you for those things that you crave. The things that we crave typically come down to some sort of carby something. Usually, like we said, it's either sugary or it's some sort of refined starchy carb. It's chips, it's pasta, it's a sweet. So a couple of the things I would say are my favorites as far as swap outs is things like ice cream. I love the higher protein, lower sugar ice cream. There's Halo Top. There's a bunch of different varieties. There's one called Rebel. Those are my two favorites in terms of how they taste and nutritionally is Halo Top and Rebel. But I look for those that are higher protein, lower sugar. If it's chocolate, try any of the varieties of 70% cocoa. They have them in truffle form, bar form. There's so many ways. If it's kind of that salty, crunchy, I love Beanitos because they are higher fiber, higher protein. Mary's Gone Crackers is like this intense, crunchy cracker, and there's all different flavors that it comes in. Veggie chips, there's the brand Rhythm Foods, has like real carrots, real cauliflower, real kale that's made into chips, not the pseudo veggie chips that are really just like the straws, like the veggie straws. Those are just rice starch, potato starch with vegetable coloring added essentially, but real veggie chips. The key is to identify what it is you're craving and what it is that you typically crave on that regular basis. Acknowledge that this is something that is a weakness of yours and then be ready for it. And when you're going to the store and you're venturing out, seek out these options to try to truly surround yourself with these viable options that you are going to think are a good alternative. It's an ice cream for ice cream versus that apple instead of ice cream. On baking, we'll talk about a whole bunch of different ways that we can bake from scratch. Swerve has a whole bunch of bake mixes for cookies, cakes, cupcakes, and stuff like that. That's like boxed bake mixes. So there's a lot of options there to kind of create these truly crave-worthy favorites that can kind of stand in for what we're talking about. And I'll be talking in a little bit about tons of options for your favorite pasta dishes, all kinds of stuff. So top thing though is to see what we're eating, less about, oh my gosh, I shouldn't eat a cookie, a chip, a brownie, but more about how am I fueling my body? How am I fueling my body to maximize energy, support my immune system, and to help me manage stress, clearing out those carbs as much as we can, the sugars and processed carbs specifically. And then, but importantly, we've got to surround ourselves with nutritious options to these favorites and know that these are weaknesses. We're going to be tempted to reach for these. And so, what are we going to have instead? We do have a brand specific shopping guide on our Eat Fit smartphone app. So if you download the app, you just type Eat Fit in the App Store, it'll download our Oshner Eat Fit smartphone app. And we have several different types of grocery lists in there. And we have specific brands of everything from chips to pasta to ice cream to everything in there. So that's a fantastic resource for you as well. So when we're looking at kind of the core nutrition principles, the sugars and white carbs is key, making sure we're getting protein in, making sure we're getting as much produce, the, nutrient-rich vegetables, fruits. Protein, of course, keeps us fuller longer, including that source of protein is going to be, think of it as like it's more stabilizing. It's going to keep you fuller longer. It's going to keep that energy, that blood sugar more stable. So when you're having protein, you're less likely to have this roller coaster of highs and lows than when you just have those sugary or processed white carbs. So every time you're eating, looking to see, okay, what am I including with it that is either a protein source, and if not protein, then some sort of fat, especially like a plant-based fat. So nut butters, avocado, what type of plant-based fats are we going to have in there? And as we said earlier, amping up the produce, which brings us to the topic of, okay, how do we get more produce in, and the plant-based diet and plant-forward diet that I was talking about earlier. So we know that fresh fruits and vegetables are going to be key. A lot of times when you're in the grocery store, they're kind of picked over, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, the issues with this. But keep in mind that frozen can be just as nutritious as fresh. And so when you're looking at vegetables or fruits, look for the varieties if they're frozen, without added sauces or salts or sugars. And then you can get creative. So you've got that frozen spinach, make it into a cream spinach by blending it, stirring in some Greek yogurt, riced cauliflower, spiralized zucchini, these ancient grain blends. All of these are now available in the freezer aisle of mainstream supermarkets. And so it's easy ways that we can get produce in, plant-based, foods, even if they're not available as much in the produce section, still we can find them in our freezer aisle. So when we are talking about nudging ourselves more to a plant-forward diet, if you've been thinking about it and you've kind of been like, okay, I know I need to incorporate more plant-based foods in, but it just hasn't been part of your lifestyle, part of your daily routine, now's the time. And there's several different key things at play here. So I guess backing up, like as Americans, we have been accustomed to, for years, pretty much our entire lives, most of us, we have been accustomed to having this like a gigantic array of options available to us always. So we go into the grocery store and there's like, an entire aisle devoted to salad dressings and every type of salad dressing you can imagine. If you're in other countries, a lot of times there's, that salad dressing section is 3 feet wide. Ours is, 30, 40, 50 or feet longer. It's this giant, it's in the entire aisle dedicated to it. Yogurts, there's, more than 500 varieties of yogurts in some supermarkets. We're just accustomed to so many options, and it's all facets of our life. It's especially food. Forever, we have seemed to have like a limitless access to restaurants, to fast casual or higher end restaurants, fast casual restaurants, supersized supermarkets, fast food. And now with delivery apps, we've been able to dial up literally exactly what we want when we want it with just the press of a button. And we've gotten accustomed to that. And we've gotten accustomed to not really having to think too much, push a button, and exactly what we have in our mind can easily show up either at our doorstep or in our cart. But as the coronavirus pandemic has unfolded, this flexibility has truly come to a screeching halt. And our options have quickly narrowed. Menus are limited if a restaurant is even open. And depending on when and where you shop, some of those store shelves are really bare. But some good has come of it because many of us are cooking way more than we have in recent years, and we're spending a lot more time planning our meals, preparing our meals. And we've had to learn how to adapt. So if that favorite ingredient or brand isn't available, we're having to figure out substitutions and creative solutions to still make our dish work without it. And this is also the perfect opportunity to experiment with more plant forward meals, meatless meals, or at least meals that have less meat, more plants. And there's been a lot of news reports lately that actually kind of, if you've been on the fence, can give us that nudge to actually take this step forward. So you've probably seen some of the headlines lately about plants, especially like meat processing plants that have been temporarily closed because of workers infected with coronavirus. And the headlines are, catch our attention, but the stories are basically, is there going to be a shortage of meat, of beef, of pork, of chicken? And, just before Easter, everyone was concerned about, I haven't been seeing eggs on my store shelves. There was just some of those things that we thought were staples and would always be there. We've had a little bit of a harder time finding them. I've gone into some stores and the entire fresh poultry section is completely empty. So, while the headlines can be a little startling, they are impacting us in some ways. And then there was a recent headline in the New York Times, and the headline was dumped milk, smashed eggs, plowed vegetables, food waste of the pandemic. And when I read that, it was just the article was especially heartbreaking. It was talking about the many farmers who are actually being forced to destroy millions and millions and millions of pounds of fresh food. And not only is that awful for these farmers to have to do this, but there's so many people who need this food, yet the farmers are still having to destroy it because they have been typically, having these crops that they know they've been able to have guaranteed to go to restaurants or hotels or schools. But with these either being closed or offering limited menus, the farmers don't have their usual customer. And especially with fresh produce or things that are more perishable, transporting them across the country to reach whatever community in need, a lot of times for these farmers, it's just not an option. And so they're relegated to actually literally burying millions of pounds of vegetables in trenches, or they're plowing perfectly good vegetables back into the soil. And if you think about it, things like coffee shops were at one point one of the dairy industry's largest customers. And now that coffee shops aren't open in the way that they were before, dairy farmers are dumping an estimated, in some counts, over 3 million gallons of milk every single day, because they don't have that same customer outlet. So while we are cooking at home now more than we've ever done it before, that's happening. And so we think, well, isn't that making up for it? Like, yeah, the restaurants and all these aren't open, but we're doing so much more cooking. We're buying so much more of these foods. And a lot of farmers are able to donate to food banks and other organizations to provide to people in need. But those two things are still not enough to make up for the huge volumes of food that was planted and planned for these giant businesses and schools and organizations. So we, each of us listening to this, single-handedly are not able to solve this supply chain problem, but we can at least do our part to support farmers by buying their produce and helping to ensure that our meals, we're experimenting with meatless meals, or at least meals with less meat, and adding their produce in to make them nutritious, delicious, filled with color. With farmers, this means we can buy them in our grocery store. A lot of our groceries do have local produce in there. If not, we're still buying produce from some farm somewhere when we're buying it in the grocery store, especially, if we think produce section. But even the freezer section, we're still picking up that produce, consuming it, and getting it into our homes. I would encourage you in your areas, find out what your local farmers markets are doing. Here in New Orleans, the farmers markets are being really creative with ways to have pickup points that you can still do boxes from your local farmers. So, just because the farmers market isn't open in the traditional way, go to their website of the farmers markets in your area and see what are they doing now, because almost always they're finding a way to collaborate with some type of one or two or more organizations for pickup points, drop-off points, or whatever it might be to get produce boxes into our hands. So with that being said, when we're looking at, okay, we're going with meals that are going to be lower in meat, we're trying to get as much produce into our plate, and we're still also want to make sure we get that protein in there even without the meat. Here's dozens of ways. There are dozens of ways to get creative with it, but here's some of my favorites. So one, and this is great for families, like if you're kind of doing big one pot, one dish things, protein rich pasta. And if you haven't tried chickpea pasta like Banza pasta yet, you have to try it. It looks and tastes way more like regular pasta than whole wheat pasta does, but it packs in 14 grams of protein into every serving. That's the equivalent of about 2 ounces of meat. Plus, it's got about 8 grams of fiber. That's more than double the protein and way more than double the fiber you would get in traditional pasta. Beyond the Banza chickpea pasta, there's also black bean pasta, but it is black, so you're not going to fool anybody with that one. There's edamame pasta. They actually have like 25 grams of protein and 12 grams of fiber, even more than the Banza. You can also do lentil pasta. So all of these are ways that we can make pasta that's actually still giving us protein, just like meat was, but without adding it in there. And then once you've got this, we can get just really creative with what we add into the pasta. So, throwing in any types of vegetables in there. I love like cooking down spinach, wilted spinach, mushrooms. You could do things like fresh tomatoes in there. You can do pretty much any type of vegetable that you like. You can roast it, toss it in with your pasta. You can serve it hot. You could do it with a marinara sauce. You could do it with an olive oil type sauce, olive oil, garlic. You could also do a chilled pasta salad using Greek yogurt through it. So there's so much that you can do with that, but that's also one where you can make a big dish of it, make a big pot of it, and it's a crowd pleaser. And it's an easy way to squeeze in your protein, squeeze in your vegetables. It's not a whole lot of effort. And you can find that any of those pastas at pretty much any type of a grocery store. Beyond protein-rich pasta, there's also beans. Of course, beans are always, as soon as you talk about meat-free, we go straight to beans because they're cheap. They're truly a superfood. They pack in tons of protein, fiber, electrolytes, antioxidants. We can do them, over brown rice or over cauliflower rice. You could put them in a stew or in a soup. You can puree them for a different kind of a take on hummus. But one of the coolest things, and I will link to this in our podcast notes, beans can also be used to replace flour in your favorite baked goods. And so essentially, you would use 1 cup of cooked pureed beans to replace 1 cup of flour along with a couple of tablespoons of fat. So the key is to match the bean that you're using to whatever that finished product is. So brownies, you would use black beans. Red velvet cake, you would use red beans. Chocolate chip cookies, you'll use white beans. So I'll link to a blog post that I did for Ochsner Health, which has like 6 cool ways to use canned beans to create really delicious stuff like ice cream, chocolate chip cookies, red velvet cupcakes, and brownies and hummus. And they're all lower carb, higher fiber, higher protein, but they're all naturally gluten-free. So protein-rich pasta, beans, Greek yogurt. That is a huge one, I would say. Stock up on this, even if you're not a big yogurt person, but it's a versatile way to add protein to any meal or snack. It's also one of the top sources of immune-boosting probiotics in our diet. So I will link to an article I did that is 15 sweet and savory ways to use Greek yogurt. From cheese sauce to soup to dips. You can make dips that are savory. You can make dips that are sweet. You can make it use it for tuna salad, salmon salad, egg salad, pasta salad that we talked about earlier. You can make salad dressings out of Greek yogurt. Smoothies, of course, I think is kind of our go-to thing we think of. But you can use Greek yogurt in place of butter. You can even make popsicles or even creme brulee with it. So there's so much, I would say, with Greek yogurt that if you're stocking up on things that are kind of your basics, Banza chickpea pasta, check. Beans, and it could either be dried beans or canned beans. I like to get a low sodium canned beans when possible. And then Greek yogurt. My favorite, I've talked about this before, is the Fage 2%. And then we have so many ways that we can use Greek yogurt. Pizza. This is one kind of like the protein rich pasta. You can just get creative and do whatever you want with it. And it's a really easy way to use leftover vegetables that might be a little bit past their prime, but you could toss them through that Banza chickpea pasta, or you could use them spread them out over the top of a pizza. And it's an easy meal in a flash. What I would say, though, obviously, is watching what kind of crust you use. In the freezer section of grocery stores, there's a brand called Outer Isles. That is by far my favorite cauliflower pizza crust. Most cauliflower crusts in the freezer section are usually a starchy flour, like a brown rice flour, and some cauliflower. They're not bad, but there's still a lot of grain or flour in there, rice flour or some other type of starchy flour. The Outer Isles pizza crust is my favorite. I will also link to a recipe that I have for a do-it-yourself cauliflower crust. It's really, really easy. It's like 5 ingredients, and it's one of those things you can make them little, almost like sandwich thins or personal pizzas. You can make it bigger. But again, topping it with whatever vegetables, olive oil, pasta sauce, burrata, fresh mozzarella, like different things there to basically all of this is going to be making it like one big veggie heavy pizza. And on the note of vegetables, I really like eggplant and mushrooms as a way to kind of give a texture of a meat replacer in recipes. There's something that whether it's a grilled portobello mushroom or grilled eggplant, they kind of have a little bit of a meat-like texture. So you can cube them, roast them, and add them to any kind of a dish, add it to sauteed vegetables or onto the pizzas or onto the pasta like we were talking about. I like to take lasagna, like make basically an eggplant lasagna. So taking those eggplant slices, grilling them, and then using the ricotta cheese or cottage cheese or it can be any blend of ricotta or a cottage cheese or also like using Parmesan cheese. I'll use the Sal and Judy's Heart Smart sauce and just layering and basically you can make a vegetarian lasagna, or you could put in, you could use lean ground beef, or you could use the vegetarian like veggie crumbles instead of beef there. You could add shrimp into that. You could kind of mix it up as to how you wanted to do it. But those are some of my easy kind of dinners is an eggplant lasagna. And that can give you several nights worth of dinners for your family. Other things, salmon or tuna salads. I think everyone kind of, when you're thinking about what am I going to stock up on for non-perishables, everyone kind of reaches probably for like canned tuna or salmon or something like that. And basically use it just like you would make your favorite chicken salad, but with tuna or salmon. And I can link on here too some of my favorite recipes. There's one that basically it's like the Sonoma Chicken Salad at Whole Foods, but we've mixed it up. So we still have grapes and nuts in it, but using Greek yogurt instead of mayonnaise. And then again, you could use salmon or tuna. Have another recipe that's an avocado cilantro kind of chicken salad that we basically turned into either a tuna salad or a salmon salad. So just so many different ways that we can make it actually tasty beyond just popping that can or opening that pouch of it. One thing I would recommend here, though, if you're going with tuna or salmon out of the can or the pouch, my preference is salmon because it is higher in omega-3s with less mercury than tuna. If you are going for tuna, opt for light tuna instead of the albacore or white tuna because the light tuna will be lower in mercury as well. If you are doing the albacore or white tuna, just have it not more than about once a week because of the mercury content. Eggs, that's again kind of one of those things like beans. They're super inexpensive, excellent source of protein. They're also one of the top food sources of choline, which plays a key role in our metabolism, and that's actually in the yolk. So we don't want to toss the yolk. We want to keep it. It's got good stuff in there that we don't find in other areas of our diet. So there's the obvious thing with eggs, scrambled, omelet, frittata. Go online and just Google egg in a mug, and you'll find hundreds of recipes for easy microwave egg dishes in your mug. But you can add eggs to your stir-fry dishes, or you can mix in leftover vegetables into, crack a bunch of eggs, kind of whisk them up with a little fork, put in your leftover vegetables, and then pour them into a muffin tin and bake them. And you basically have grab-and-go protein-rich egg muffins. The other thing that I would say when we're still talking about meatless stuff is crawfish. And Crawfish, as before we were boiling it, it's not exactly what we think of as health food, but they actually are more nutritious than you might think. So crawfish are really low in calories, like ounce for ounce, they're about half the calories of a roasted skinless chicken breast, ounce for ounce. They're also, low in carbs, protein rich, essentially zero saturated fat, but they're also a really good source of vitamin B12 and selenium. So when we boil them, of course, we're really racking up the sodium, but you can buy them frozen. Just be sure you're buying local crawfish, not Chinese crawfish, but buying local crawfish, which they have frozen, or you can do the boil yourself. What I would say, if you're looking to do a crawfish boil that's lower sodium, you can do crawfish boil in a smaller batch, like in a pot on your stove. And you can buy the smaller boxes of seasonings. And what you would do is you would buy the crawfish boil seasoning packs. There's so many different varieties of these, but buy the ones that are spice blends only that instruct you to add salt, not the ones that already have salt in there. The reason why is you can add just about a quarter of the salt that it calls for on the box instructions, especially like if you're doing a crawfish boil for 20 people, you probably want to follow the instructions. You don't want people thinking it's bland crawfish. If you've got, well, first of all, you're not doing it for 20 people right now, but normally a lot of people may not want to switch and vary any from the instructions. But when you're at home, you're boiling crawfish, you're kind of doing more of a stovetop boil. Use those seasoning blends and use the ones that don't contain salt, and then they'll tell you how much salt to add along with the boil. But you can change that. So again, using about 1/4 of what they call for, and then that is going to be a way to do boiled crawfish that's a lot lower sodium. So those are kind of some really easy ways that I would say are stock up on these things around you. So that protein-rich pasta, my favorite is Banza. Beans, whether it's dried beans, canned beans with no salt added. If it's regular canned beans, you can always rinse them to dial back the sodium. I'm going to link to tons of ways to make these decadent indulgences with beans that you wouldn't even think are coming out of beans. Greek yogurt, using Greek yogurt in all these versatile ways to add protein to your meal or snack. Pizza, experimenting with cauliflower crust pizzas as a way to use some of those leftover vegetables and lower sodium cheeses like burrata, fresh mozzarella. Eggplant and mushrooms are my two favorite meat replacer vegetables. Salmon and tuna, if you've got that canned or pouched, we can use that as well. Eggs, crawfish, all of these, again, kind of these meat-free ways, that we're not having chicken, pork, or beef, but we're still getting the protein, we're still getting the nutrients in there. When we're talking about meat alternatives, if you are looking for those, we did do an entire podcast on Beyond and Impossible burgers, so you can listen to that as well. But from a nutritional perspective, my top choice for ground beef and burger alternatives is the Beyond Meat when it comes to the label. One thing I would say that's very, very key if you're looking at veggie burgers or the veggie crumbles for ground beef or the vegan sausages, Italian sausages, or kind of the chicken strips, any of these things that are the meat replacers for these, the key is to really look at labels closely because some are still loaded with carbs and sodium. So when you're looking for something that is going to serve as your meat replacement, the key is going to be to compare the ratio of protein to carbs because your goal is to use this as your meat replacer. So we want to look at how much protein does it have versus how much carbs. As a general rule of thumb, I look for 2 to 3 times more protein than carbs. So if it's got 20 grams of protein, I want it to have not more than about 5 or 10 grams of carbs. So 2 to 3 times more protein than carbs is what we want to look for on the label. Many products are the reverse. You look at a lot of veggie burgers, they may have, in the 20s as far as grams of carb with 4 grams of protein. So that's basically a carb burger, not giving us the protein that we are looking for. So I hope that's kind of inspired you to think about some other non-meat ways that we can incorporate protein into our plates, that we can incorporate vegetables into our plates, and also things that are kind of staples that we can buy that aren't necessarily perishable, or they're less perishable. They have a longer shelf life. as we're storing them in our kitchens. And we can kind of stretch them out and get creative with those things. It's also really important, just like anything, to set a schedule. So if you found that you've been mindlessly eating, you've been snacking like there's no tomorrow, you're snacking to pass the time, setting that schedule and trying to have that daily routine in place, it's going to help us feel more in control. And this is going to be what's our routine in terms of work. When are we going to get that movement in? What's our sleep schedule? When are we having our meals? But having that routine in place is going to make us feel more in control. It's going to make more room for what really matters to us. And having that routine, that schedule, is also going to help us strengthen these healthy habits that we're trying to build. So again, making sure that we are prioritizing well-being in our own lives, and that we are looking at how we've dealt with the coronavirus quarantine so far, looking at where we've been strong and where we've really had some weak spots, and taking that and learning from that and carrying that with us well beyond coronavirus quarantine, because we're always going to have stressors in our lives. And if this is kind of how we're either regressing or we're reacting to it, we can learn from this absolutely moving forward. So making sure that we prioritize well-being in our lives, those behaviors around nutrition, alcohol, movement, sleep, and positivity, and realizing that this is much, much bigger than us. It's out of our control. But what we can control is whether we choose to let this break our spirit and our wellness, or to make us stronger. So as mentioned, I will include the links that I talked about in the show notes of this episode. It's a lot of things that will be a lot of resources for you guys. And let me know what you think. As you incorporate some of these strategies into your own life, I would love to hear about it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.